Was Martin Luther King right? Does love have the power to turn an enemy into a friend? We're creating an inspiring documentary called Courage to Love, The Power of Compassion, which explores the extraordinary stories of those who have chosen to do the unthinkable, love and forgive even those who are deeply hurtful. Through their journeys, we will uncover the profound impact of forgiveness and love, not only on those offering it, but also receiving it. In addition, we'll hear from experts who will explore whether love and compassion are part of our human nature and how we can bridge divides with those we disagree with. If you'd like to support our film, please go to www.maitrecentre.com/documentary. So it's maitrecentre.com/documentary. Hello and welcome to the Loving Compassion podcast with Gissele. We believe that love and compassion have the power to heal our lives and our world. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content. Today, we're talking about self-compassion in teenagers. And my guest is Dr. Karen Bluth, who is an associate professor emerita at the University of North Carolina, where she studies how mindful self-compassion improves the mental health of teens and young adults. She is the author of 5 books for teens and caregivers, including the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens and Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens in Schools. In addition, she is a 2022 recipient of the inaugural Mind and Life Foundation Award for Public Communication of Contemplative Research. Yay! As a mindfulness practitioner for over 45 years, a mindfulness teacher, and an educator with over 18 years of classroom teaching experience, Dr. Bluth frequently gives talks, conducts workshops, and teaches classes in self-compassion in educational and community settings and trains teachers in mindful self-compassion for teens internationally. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Karen Bluth. Hi, Karen.
Hi, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. I think this is a topic that it definitely needs to be discussed. And as a mother of 2 teens, I know the need for self-compassion. I was wondering
Mhm.
if you could tell the audience a little bit about how you got started in this work.
Sure. Well, it really takes me back to my teen years. I was in high school. I was a senior in high school. It was 1975, and I needed a topic for an independent study project that I had to do for my English class, and it was due the next day. I was driving down the road. I didn't have my topic, of course. I was driving down the road, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a sign that said something about meditation, TM. At that time, it was transcendental meditation. It still is, actually. But
Mm.
I remembered hearing something about meditation in a different class, in my social studies class. And there was something about it when we talked about it in that social studies class that resonated with me. And I remember thinking, that makes sense. So when I saw that sign out of the corner of my eye, I thought, oh, well, let me check this out. So I pulled in. It was this old house, I remember, and I went in and I picked up some brochures about transcendental meditation and talked to the people there. And they said, well, if you want to be initiated, and I think that was the word they used, come back Saturday at 10 o'clock. I think they said bring flowers and a piece of fruit. So it sounded very mysterious to me. But I did. I went back and was given a mantra at that time. And that was the beginning of my meditation practice. And,
Mm.
I practiced for my senior year in high school. I think when I went to college, it kind of fell away for a couple of years. And then I got back into it after college and have been practicing meditation, mindfulness since, you know, probably the mid 80s.
Mm.
Regularly. It's been a cornerstone and anchor throughout my entire adult life, as I'm sure you know, it has been for many people. I was very lucky to start early on. And then sometime in the 90s, I had little kids, and so I spent a fair amount of time in my car with them in their car seats, trying to get them to nap because they wouldn't nap at home.
Yeah.
I imagine there's a lot of people that resonate with this. And so I had a cassette tape at that time, that's what we used in our cars, of poetry of self-compassion, read by the British
Mm.
poet David White. And this cassette tape had been passed around my meditation group. And so I had this copy and I listened to these poems, and I think I internalized the message a lot because it was in my car stereo for quite some time. And so this message of self-compassion became really integrated into how I spoke to myself. And then about a decade later, I decided to go back to school and get my PhD. And I wanted to bring together the different threads of my life. So that was my personal life, my mindfulness practice.
Mhm.
And this whole time I was teaching in schools. I was a teacher in middle school and upper elementary school, fifth grade, mostly, also younger grades, but mostly fifth grade and middle school. And so youth and being with youth and wanting to improve the lives of youth was really very central to me and my mission actually. And so when I went back to school in 2008, I wanted to bring together these different threads of my life, my personal mindfulness practice and my interest in helping youth. And at that time, it was just a few years after Kristen Neff was publishing her work. So her first articles, research articles on self-compassion came out in 2003.
Mm.
And so this was 5 years later. There wasn't that much published at that time and nothing with teens. And so that's when I just started diving into the work at that point. So that's a long, a long story, really, but that's really how I came to where I am now.
It's wonderful. I love that as the teen you, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be initiated here. I'll show up with my stuff.
It's like, why not? It was
Yeah.
1975. I was like, whatever, it sounds a little weird. Fruit and flowers and a mantra, but whatever.
Yeah, that's lovely. I do Kriya yoga, and so there is like an initiation part of the component too, and there's like the offering. So yeah, I resonated with that. I'm
Mhm.
interested to know what the receptivity is of young people towards self-compassion. And the reason why I ask that is as a mother of two teenagers, I know that when I emphasize to them the importance of meditation, the importance of loving yourself. They understand it, but they don't always want to practice what I'm doing. And so they want to find their own path to loving themselves and being compassionate to themselves. What has been the reception of young people when you show up to schools?
Yeah, of course, of course. So, yeah, it's interesting. So I hear from parents a lot that and this is actually, this is the job of teens is to resist what comes from parents
Yeah.
and find their own way, as you said. So this is not only is it not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing that they're a little bit resistant, a little bit of, I don't want to just like take on what you're handing me.
Yeah.
So what is the reception? It depends who it's coming from. So again, if it's coming from a parent, of course it varies. It depends on the relationship between the parent and the kid. But usually, and I'm making a generalization here, there is a little bit of resistance, a little bit to, maybe a little bit more than a little bit of resistance. Generally, after the first class, teens, if we don't push them and we don't, it's always an invitation to participate in these classes. We're not heavy-handed about it. We don't require them. Not that you could anyway. You can't require
Mm.
somebody to do these practices, right?
Yeah.
You just invite them in. But we don't, we're not heavy-handed. We invite them in. And if we approach it that way, the resistance decreases a lot. And, the teens might be quiet, but they're taking it in. And I have to tell you that I cannot tell you how many times I've heard from teens at the end of a class. Teens will pull me aside and say something like, this was really my mom's idea to take this class, or this was my therapist's idea. I didn't really want to do it, but I'm so glad I did. I frequently hear that. This is the nature of the beast, this is what teens are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be questioning. They're supposed to be particularly questioning what comes on, what the adults around them are saying to them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a developmental stage, right? Is we're constantly trying to improve what our parents did be better, be different. If we only just accepted the status quo, I don't think there'd be progress. I'm curious as to what some of the outcomes you have seen. What are some of the things that you have found have helped? Maybe some of the things that maybe weren't as successful.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, we know from research that teens who are more self-compassionate experience less depression, anxiety, and stress. For example, we know that as teens progress through adolescence, they tend to become more depressed, and that's mostly driven by females. And that when teens are more self-compassionate, they're less likely to get depressed as they move through the teen years. So we see that. We also know that stress is linked to depression, but we know that teens who are more self-compassionate, when they're stressed, they're less likely to be depressed. We also know that depression is linked to self-injury, non-suicidal self-injury, things like cutting. But teens who are more self-compassionate are less likely to self-injure when they're depressed. So we see across many studies in many different places all over the world, we see that self-compassion actually acts as a protective factor or a buffer against some of these difficult challenges in the teen years. And we also know when we actually teach teens self-compassion through our Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens course and workshops and things like that, we see that teens at the end experience less depression than they did at the beginning, less anxiety, less stress. And in our most recent study with teens who had some suicidal ideation going in, that they had significantly less suicidal ideation at the end of the study.
It's really, really powerful. I just wanted to clarify, you said driven by females. Does that mean that it's mostly young girls who are experiencing the depression?
Well, what we see is that as girls move from age 11 or 12 to 18, generally they become, of course, it's a generalization, but overall, teen girls become more depressed. And by the time they're 18 or so, 18 or 19, they are twice as likely to be depressed as males of the same age. And that statistic stays the same, stable through adulthood. So, adult women are generally twice as likely to be depressed as adult men. That doesn't mean that boys or men aren't struggling also. They
Yeah.
are. It's just that their way of expressing their discontent, dissatisfaction, unhappiness is not through depression, it's through other means.
Mm.
Usually external, usually things like anger comes out with anger.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. In this world of COVID, we have young people being more isolated and lonely. And with all the school shootings that have happened in America in particular, not as much in Canada, I'm curious as to the impact of self compassion on improving relationships for young people. Does self compassion work help them in terms of relationships with one another?
Yeah, well, we do have a study with young adults that shows, and these were 18 through 30, that shows decrease in loneliness when these young adults were more self-compassionate. I think what we're seeing overall is that obviously through COVID, there's a lot of isolation, loneliness, a lot more turning to social media, turning to technology, now AI. And what social media does, unfortunately, is exacerbate this sense of comparing oneself with others, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And of course, even though we all know, including teens, that what's posted in social media is not the full picture of somebody's life, it's the curated picture of somebody's life, still, it exacerbates a sense of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. Look at that person there, they have all this great stuff going on in their lives, and I don't. So self-compassion can be helpful there. And in fact, in our program, we have a social media exercise, and what we teach teens is how to be aware of how they're feeling when they're engaging with social media. So we don't
Mm.
tell them social media is bad, don't engage in it, because first of all, that's not going to work. Second of all, as adults, we engage with social media. It would be hypocritical of us to say not to. So what we do, which I think is a lot more helpful and also empowering to teens, is to teach them to notice, what are you feeling when you're engaging with social media? What's coming up for you? Are you feeling this sense of, oh, I'm not good enough? Or are you feeling lonely or sad? Or maybe you're feeling excited. Maybe you're feeling connected with others. It's not all bad. So notice what you're feeling and then make a choice that's good for you, that's healthy for you. Take care of yourself. So self-compassion is all about being good to yourself, supporting yourself, standing up for yourself, doing what's healthy for yourself. It's all of that. So if you're noticing that something is makes you feel bad, you have the power to limit it or shut it down completely. And whether that's social media or, a toxic relationship with a friend, you can do that also. But so it's bringing awareness to what you're feeling when you're engaging with that.
I really appreciate that you said this because I think I don't want to underestimate how powerful what you just said is because so many of us are so distractible. We have no idea how we're feeling in our body. And until we're present in our body, we can't really understand how we're treating ourselves. And so to allow young people to just notice how they're feeling about certain things helps them understand, hey, wait a minute, is this a positive thing for me or a negative thing for me? And makes them more aware about the choices they're making. And therefore they can choose differently. They might not choose differently, but it gives them that awareness of like, how am I being impacted by everything? And this is really authentically me. Then they can make that choice. They could take their power back. So I think that's fantastic. Can you share a little bit about some of the other things that you do in your self compassion program with teens? Like, how do you get them to engage? Because I don't know if I would see a teen just sitting for hours and hours doing meditation.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we don't ask them to sit for hours and hours, to practice. First of all, it's adapted from Kristen Neff and Chris Germer's Mindful Self-Compassion class for adults. The teen class is different in that it does involve, it's much more activity based. It's developmentally appropriate. So at the beginning of every class, and there are 8 classes, there's a little bit of art. And it could be mindful drawing. It could be, there's one class, which is my favorite art activity, which involves playing with oobleck, which, if you're not familiar with oobleck, it's like the best slime ever. Comes from the Dr. Seuss book Barnaby and the Oobleck, but it's just a wonderful substance, and it foreshadows something that we do later in the class. Each art activity foreshadows something that happens in that class. So we have a little bit of art, like 10 minutes of art at the beginning of every class. We emphasize it's not about creating some beautiful thing that you're going to hang on your wall. It's about just noticing feeling of a pen in your hand or whatever. So it's mindful activity. We have a couple of music meditations with the teens, which the teens absolutely love. We play some games. We introduce informal practices mostly. We introduce some formal practices, but it's mostly informal practices, which means things that you can do in the moment. So you're starting to feel a little stressed. Notice the feeling of your feet on the floor, that point of contact. And that's because when we start to feel stressed, we're generally in our heads, we're worrying, we're anxious. It's all
Mhm.
going on in our heads. And when we bring attention to something physical, like the sensation of our feet on the floor, that can be very grounding. So, mostly informal practices. So, our regular class is an after school class, which is 8 sessions, 90 minutes. We also have a school version, which is 16 different sessions, which are 45 minutes long each. And then we also have what I'm calling drop-in sessions. And this is because school counselors have told us that, sometimes they don't have a big chunk of time with kids. They have only 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So we have these drop-in sessions where they could just go ahead into the class, teach this for 10 minutes, and so they get a little bit of taste of what this is about, or, a number of different drop-in sessions.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to mention how important art and music and play are in terms of really reconnecting us with ourselves. There's been so much intergenerational trauma in my family and our history that I've had to kind of go back to basics and realized how difficult it was for me to play, how difficult it was for me to sit there and be present with myself. Even coloring, I tried coloring and I just kind of rushed through it like I had an appointment. And I'm like, why am I not allowing myself to be in this moment? But those opportunities, art and music, things that in the school system we haven't always prioritized, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think as adults, we don't play enough by any by any means, and in fact, when we train teachers in the program, we frequently hear from these adults that, they want to do these activities, because they're fun. And we need to play more. We need to have more fun. Just
Yeah.
lighthearted play.
Yeah. I'm allowing myself to dance more and twirl more and play more, even though I do it awkwardly, because there's always this voice in my head that is like, I have to color it perfectly, right? Like, which is weird because I like to think that I'm pretty compassionate with myself. But as really am stepping up into being more connected with my inner child, I can see those little tiny things where I'm like, oh, maybe I should have colored this nicer. Or maybe this should have been inside the line.
And teens have those voices also, and which is why we emphasize as they're actually doing the art activity, we say at least several times in that 10-minute period, remember, we don't care what this looks like. This is not about the product. It's not about producing some beautiful thing. It's about simply noticing what's going on, noticing the sound of the pencil on the paper.
Hmm.
Is that making a sound? Notice the feeling when your hand is gripping, the pencil. Is there a tightness in your hand? So it's all about that. It's all about noticing feeling, noticing the process, noticing the sensations that are going on as you're doing the art. So we're always emphasizing that as they're doing the art, and even thoughts, noticing, you notice any thoughts coming up in your head like, oh, I don't like this particular part of the drawing. And can you remember that's just a thought and notice your thought? And as they're learning more about the mindfulness piece in the class, we'll, bring in that notice a thought. It's just a thought. It doesn't mean it's a fact. You can let that thought drift away.
So powerful. Because personally, having done self compassion practices, is that you're teaching reconnection, right? With yourself, with your body, with your being. As a society, we're so disconnected from ourselves, from other people. And to just even feel like your fingertips in your body and see how tense we are in the thoughts. In my own practice, I'm learning to love my fear and focusing on learning to love everything, even the challenging moments. Can I truly love everything in my life? Or just even if I can't, can I just accept it? Can I learn to just allow it? And it can
Mhm.
feel dynamic, right? So I can imagine for teenagers with their hormones that it must be quite the experience.
Mhm.
Curious as to your perspectives around how teenagers are doing nowadays.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is a lot of struggle. It's a really hard time. And that's what, the statistics that we're seeing, that there's high levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness. It's an overwhelming world that we're living in. I'm working on a book right now with my wonderful colleague, Marissa Knox, and this is a book for young adults. And we haven't settled on a title yet, but we are bringing in this idea, and this is, throughout the book, and it's about self-compassion for young adults, but this idea that we are living in an incredibly challenging world right now, unbelievably challenging in so many ways, on so many levels. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that things are much harder now than they have been in decades past. And, when I was a young adult, it wasn't easy either. There was a huge recession. I mean, I graduated from a good university and couldn't get a job after, and I was waiting tables. It wasn't easy then either, but it's a lot more difficult now. The economy is even harder and rougher now than it was in the 80s when I was waiting tables after graduating. And I have two young adult children, and I hear a lot about their lives and their friends' lives and how hard it is. I mean, so we have to acknowledge that. And when I'm teaching young adults and teens, I always bring that in that, this isn't your fault that you feel all this huge range of difficult emotions. You're living at a time when, things are really hard politically, economically, on the global stage, everything. So to acknowledge that, to put that out there, to have that be the context in which we then bring in self-compassion. And we talk about how, okay, so now knowing that the world is this way, and guess what? For the moment, we can't do anything about it. We can in the long run, yes, and we're working towards that. But right now, in the moment, we're stuck with it. So how can we take care of ourselves? How can we support ourselves? Knowing that it's rough right now, and it may
Mhm.
not be our fault that we can't get a job or feel safe in our schools or
Yeah.
all of that.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think acknowledging is sort of the first step towards saying, okay, where is my power in this moment? Because I think it's one of the conversations I had with my students is like, in the time when you might feel so powerless, where do you have power? Even if it's just in terms of how you determine how you feel about the situation. Are you going to let the situation sink you down and lead you to further depression? Or are you going to choose to say, I'm going to choose to be kind to myself. I'm going to choose to do the best I can. I'm going to choose to allow and do in the moment what I can. And then, if I make a mistake or a trip over the same rock, I'm going to pick myself up and keep going. Like, or if I can't, I can't. Right. So how do we practice that? Because there's an element of me that believes that part of the reason why we are in the situation we are in terms of the world is because of a disconnection, because of a lack of self compassion and self love. There's a lack of love in the world in general. And we keep thinking that the way that we're going to approach it is have more money and be more successful and do all of these things, but that just breeds separation, which leads to my
Mhm.
next question of how can self compassion help us create community?
Yeah. So that's a great question because, of course, as we know, community is absolutely vital. Having community is vital. So I think, the first thing that comes to mind is that when we're more self-compassionate, we have less fear of failure because we know we're not going to beat ourselves up when we fail. If we fail at something, we're just going to say, well, it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means like that didn't work for me in that particular moment. How this applies to community is that we're more likely to reach out to others, right? So if we're not so afraid that of getting rejected by others, we're more likely to make an attempt, move out of our comfort zone and reach out, engage in a conversation with somebody we don't know, for example. We're more likely to join a community group or in the case of teens, sign up for some new sport or music class or whatever to engage with others more and develop that community. When we're feeling so unqualified, unworthy, not enough, we're much more likely to isolate.
Yeah.
And so in that way, obviously that's how community develops is when we're able to reach out and engage with others in, all different ways.
Yeah. And the other thing I found in it, especially in my self compassion practice, has been that it's led me to be more authentically myself. And
Mhm.
you can't really allow yourself to be seen and to be loved and to find your people if you are not allowing yourself to be authentically yourself or to be vulnerable. And so I think that's a really key aspect of self-compassion, because that's really what primarily young people want. They just want to be authentically themselves. But we hear all these messages. I know I heard them growing up, all about how we have to look a certain way, we have to be a certain way, there's a right answer to everything. And so I think that's the beauty of self-compassion, is the allowing multiple perspectives, is the allowing of differences and the discomfort.
When you were talking about that, what I was thinking about was in our teen class, we have a session where teens have the opportunity to really reflect on their core values, and we take them through a particular activity to do this so that they're thinking about what's really important to me? What do I really value?
Mm,
How do I want to live my life? And what are the
yeah.
things I want to let go of? So
Mhm.
it's not a conclusive activity where they get to the end and they say, okay, this is what I want, but it's an opportunity for them to really take a few moments to think about and to reflect on, you know, what do I want to keep in my life? What do I want to hold on to? What do I value? And what do I maybe want to think about letting go of? It's just the
Mm,
beginning of that conversation with themselves.
mm. And I love that, because I've had to do this later in my life, realizing that the things I wanted to have were based on somebody else's perspective of what they thought I should have. And I went through a really stripping of, like, who am I really? And again, I did this older, right? Like, who am I really? What do I really love? What do I really want to do? What do I really want my life to look like? And it's not anything that I would have thought would have fit the picture. Like, it's not, but
Hmm.
it's so much better. It's so much greater. It's so much more me.
Hmm.
I was curious as to whether in the program there are elements of how to deal with conflict with one another.
Yeah, well, we do have a session activity where we talk about conflict with parents and
Mm, hmm.
why, first of all, why that occurs. So, why is that happening? And we talk about the developmental stage and the brain changes. And we show this video clip actually from the movie Cruise. Yeah, yeah. And, there's a teen in there and she's having a conflict with her dad, and the dad just wants to keep her safe and isolated and in the cave, and she wants to go out and explore. And we talk about how the dad is doing what he's supposed to be doing, and the teen is doing what she's supposed to be doing. Neither one of them is wrong, and yet conflict ensues because they have different objectives. And what can you do when conflict ensues, when this happens? And so, first of all, just having that awareness that this dad's not trying to be mean and horrible. He's just trying to keep his kids safe. And so, having that awareness, and then how self-compassion can support you. Because when you're supporting yourself in that way, you can, and through mindfulness also, you can regulate your emotions, and which is the first step, Well, awareness is the first step. That would be the second step. And then get to a place where you can actually talk about what's going on and acknowledge what the other person wants and needs also.
Mm. Yeah, I love that you brought the movie up, The Crudes, because what I remember, they both, the daughter and the father, push each other, right? They push each other to grow and learn. And I wanted to emphasize as well for my listeners about something that you just said, which is really important, which is dealing with conflict. The first part is always awareness. It's like awareness of how am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's happening in my body? And the second one is being able to hold space for those difficult feelings, right? Validating our feelings, holding space for those difficult feelings, having compassion for ourselves, so that then we could have compassion for other people's, even if their perspectives completely different, like differ from our own. And so I think that's the beauty of self-compassion, is that it helps us have compassion for ourselves and other people. Sometimes as they call, the disliked person.
Hmm.
But it really does start with the awareness, because I feel like we don't really know how to have conversations with people anymore. There's like this global canceling that happens because I think we're just so overwhelmed by our own emotions, and we haven't really been taught, at least some generations haven't really been taught the social emotional part of regulating our emotions so that we can then do the work of listening. And, when I think about listening, I think about the work of Valerie Carr, who talks about revolutionary love. And she says, listening, if you're truly listening, you have to be willing to change, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's can feel difficult. It can
Yeah, I
feel
think
difficult.
I think you hit on a really important and very big issue, which is that there isn't a lot of listening going on. There really isn't, there might be people sitting there waiting for the other person to finish talking so that they could say their piece, right?
Yeah.
But of course, when you're really listening, that's not what's going on. When you're really listening, you're open and willing to change your mind. So, yes, that's certainly part of this whole, the program. At the very beginning in our first class, we have a piece called Community Agreements where we all agree on how the class is going to proceed. And one of the things is deep listening, really listening without that judging voice. For
Mm.
put that judging voice aside as much as possible.
And that takes practice,
Yes,
right?
it does. It
Yeah.
absolutely does.
Often we go straight to judgment instead of
Mhm.
passing observations. The other thing I wanted to mention was listening to the voices of young people is so important, which is why I think also your work is so phenomenal. Historically, we have not viewed young people's voices as important as adult voices, or especially the voices of young children. What are your thoughts about our ability to be able to listen to young people and collaborate with them in a way that makes them feel involved? Because I know I
Mm.
didn't feel that way when I was young. Young people were not invited to sit at the table with the adults to talk about adult things and talk about the world. How can we emphasize more listening to young people?
Yeah, it's interesting. I too remember being a teen and clearly thinking, you know what? I know what I'm talking about here. I have ideas,
Yeah.
you know? And I actually did have the opportunity as a teen to be on an adult board
Mhm.
of a nonprofit organization. It was a theater organization that we were involved with. And it was a great opportunity. We need to hear teens' voices, we need to hear what they have to say. And that doesn't mean that we're going to make decisions based on everything that they say, or because obviously we've been on the planet for longer and we have a certain amount of wisdom coming from our experience. But truly, they know what they need. And giving them the opportunity to talk about it and to express it and to listen. I think what teens want more than anything is really to be listened to, is to be heard. And maybe that's what we all want more than anything, is to be heard, right? But particularly in the teen years, it's really the first time when they are aware that they have some opinions and values and things to contribute to the conversation. And as adults, I think it's our responsibility to listen and to hear their input
Yeah.
as much as we can. Again, that doesn't mean we're going to make decisions based on what they suggest. I remember my daughter, as a 15-year-old, went through a stage where she just felt like she didn't need to wear her seatbelt in the car. And I was like, oh, that's not
You're like, nah, I
happening.
got this.
Nope.
Yeah.
No.
Hmm.
So it doesn't mean we go with everything that they want to do by any stretch, but to listen, I think is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And that's a great example. I'm curious as to her perspective as to why she felt in that moment she didn't need seatbelts anymore. It's
I can ask her. I don't know. I think
interesting.
she was just exercising her perceived right as an individual, and
Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
obviously when it comes to safety, we have
Yeah.
to,
There's a history there as to how we got seatbelts. Yeah. And so
right.
engaging in that conversation. As you were talking, I was thinking about the generations and how sometimes it's difficult for parents to hear the perspectives of their young people if it ignites shame and guilt, right? I've had conversations with my parents about the impact of my childhood, and there's been lots of like deflecting because it was difficult for them to hold. some of the things that I was claiming. And I've been on the other end as well in terms of like my children when they say stuff and you're like, I hurt you. And so being able to apologize for me has been really important as a parent to emphasize to my kids that I'm not perfect. We're we're winging it out here. And in how much forgiveness and how much apologizing needs to happen and how much communication needs to happen when mistakes are made on both sides, right? And how
Hmm.
sometimes those mistakes and those conversations bring us closer together. But I can relate to my parents' experience because we all want to be, at least from my perspective, I want to be a good mom. I want to be a loving parent. I want to be the best parent that I can be. And sometimes, despite your best intents, you make mistakes, you hurt them, you do things like maybe that are based on your own fear. And so I find the practice of self compassion really helps me be kind to myself. And so that I can listen to that feedback and say, you know what? I'm going to sit with this. But it can feel difficult. Self compassion really helped me sit with those difficult feelings because I wasn't judging myself as a bad parent.
Yeah, I think being a parent has been so good for my self-compassion practice. Just because of everything that you said. My daughters are now 31 and
Mm-hmm.
33. And, of course, I made lots and lots of mistakes. I was one of those moms that I prioritized being a good mom. It was so important to me, to be a good mom. And yet I made mistakes. And recently, even, I don't know, 6, 8 months ago, I was talking to my older daughter, and there was something that I did when she was a teen that I felt, I wish I could have not done what I did. And I felt really bad about what I did. And I was talking to her about it. I said, I'm so sorry that I put my foot down. I know what you really needed was a big hug. I wish I had, done it differently. And she said, Mom, don't worry about it. You can let that go. I'm fine. But it helped me, first of all, to be able to say that. And I think I was able to say that at least in part, if not solely, because of my self-compassion practice. And I think part of what self-compassion does for us is to remind us that we don't have to be perfect. And we're not going to be anyway. We're not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. So can we forgive ourselves
Yeah.
when we make mistakes?
Yeah.
And then if we can, and if it's appropriate, or if we want to, or whatever, go to that person, like go to our kid and say, look, I am really sorry that I did that. And at the time, I thought that was best. And now I see that's not what you needed. And
Yeah.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think it's important for us to have this conversation for two reasons. Number one is we think we have to be perfect at being compassionate or none at all. None of us are perfect. And I think that's the problem. We expect ourselves to be truly compassionate, the pinnacle of love. And really, just can you just be a little bit better than yesterday? That's all it requires. Can you be a little bit more loving? Can you be a little bit more kind? That's all that is really required. And the second thing, which I think you emphasize, which is so important, it's that we think that being compassionate is going to be like, well, I'm just going to allow my crappy behavior. It is so difficult to be loving and compassionate towards yourself when you don't feel you deserve it. And what I found in my own practice is it actually enabled me to sit more with all those aspects that I didn't like about myself. The more that I was compassionate with myself, I didn't let myself off the hook. I was able to see how my behavior could have been hurtful. I was able to see how there was times when I wasn't living my values. But if I hadn't been compassionate, I would have deflected. I would have like invalidated. I would have been like, no, no, it's their problem. It's not me. And so this is why the practice of compassion is so important, and especially starting younger. So a few more questions. What's the youngest that you have done work on it? And are there groups that are helping our really young people practice compassion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with teens and as young as 11 or so.
Mm.
There are people who work with younger kids. My colleague Jamie Lynn Tatera works with kids age about 7 to 10 or so. And then my colleague Catherine Lovewell in the UK works with kids who are younger, and she has a wonderful book out and stuffed animals and all this really wonderful stuff for younger kids, and it's just adorable. I have some of her things right here. I know you're not going to be able to see it
Beautiful.
over audio, but some of
Oh,
her, so these are her stuffies that go
so
with
cute. I
her
like the rainbow one.
yeah, well, this is actually, so her book is about the inner critic, and
Yeah.
this is Crusher, which is your inner critic, and this is Booster, who is your self-compassionate voice. So the rainbow
Oh,
guy
that's
is Booster.
beautiful.
But she just has an unbelievably wonderful program. So yes, there are people working with younger kids, and yeah, it's so important to start early. So
Yes.
important.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I absolutely appreciate that you're working with teens because that can be a difficult population, but definitely needed. I think sometimes we make it more acceptable to do those kinds of things like self-compassion, self-kindness practices with young kids. And then for some reason, it just kind of drops off the face of the earth and we're not
Mhm.
continuing that practice. So I think it's wonderful that you are doing that work. Two more questions. I'm asking all of my, I guess, what the definition of self-love is.
Definition of self-love. Accepting yourself for who you are
Mm,
with all your so-called challenges, insecurities, because really that's what makes us who we are is the whole package. You know, the
yeah.
things we like about ourselves and the things we're not as comfortable with about ourselves. And when we can, and you used this word earlier, which I think is really great, allow, the word allow. When we can allow those parts of ourselves to be there, to be present, and to accept them. Say, you know what? I'm not the most patient person in the world. I know that about myself. And you know what? It's okay. It's
Mm,
okay. I'm not going to be perfect and I'm not going to be good at everything. And that's okay. It's okay not to be good at everything. So my definition of self-love would be just to, be able to allow all those parts of yourself,
mm,
to be present and to be there and maybe eventually move towards embracing them.
mm. I love that. So, last question. Where can people work with you? Where can they find you? Where can they find your books? Please share.
There's two websites. There's my website, which is my name, KarenBluth.com. And so you'll find out about me, about my work on that website. We have a new website, which I really would like to promote. It's a website for teens, and that's selfcompassionforteens.org. And self-compassion is hyphenated. And so that is a recent website that we've just launched in the last couple of months, which has all kinds of resources for teens, videos, short videos about explaining what self-compassion is, what the inner critic is, how can we deal with the inner critic. There's a quiz on there, see how self-compassionate you are. There's some videos that teens who have learned, taken our courses, have talked about their experience with self-compassion. And then there's a section about taking a deeper dive. Anyway, I really would like teens everywhere to know about this website and have access to it. And it's a great place to start to learn about how to be nicer to yourself.
Beautiful. There'll be a link on our site. So, thank you very much, Karen, for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us and for the work that you're doing, which is so important and so needed at this time. And thank you for everyone that tuned in to another episode of Loving Compassion podcast with Gissele. See you soon.